What is the future of Bitcoin adoption on a country level? And what can we learn from the person who's intimately involved with this ongoing project? Samson Mow is the CEO of Jan3, a company dedicated to the spreading of Hyperbitcoinization. He's also the founder and CEO of Pixelmatic, a video game development company. And prior to Jan3, he was the chief strategy officer at Blockstream, the company that was involved with the design of El Salvador's Volcano bond. We'll be talking about that story. Welcome to the show, Samson.
Thanks, David. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you, Samson. I followed your work for a while. Big fan of what you've been doing all around the world and your mission to spread Bitcoin. Now, Samson, tell us about the story of the Volcano bond. You were telling me offline, very interesting story about how you were approached by the government of El Salvador to design their Volcano bond. First of all, what is the Volcano bond for those viewers who may not be familiar with this?
So the Volcano bond is structured much like a traditional bond, except for it is backed by Bitcoin. So the proposal that El Salvador is running with is a $1 billion bond raise with $500 million or 500 million buying Bitcoin. And that Bitcoin will be shared with the holders of the bond. So after a 5-year period, a 5-year lockup, they'll start selling off some of the Bitcoin that they've bought quarter by quarter. And the Bitcoin appreciation will be shared with the bondholders. The other 500 million, and this is why it's called a Volcano bond, will be invested into geothermal energy infrastructure and in Bitcoin mining. And the bond design is for a 6.5% coupon. And of course, at the end of the 10-year period, you'll get your principal back. So this is the Volcano bond in a nutshell.
Okay. I'm going to dig into this a little bit deeper. But first of all, how did this idea come about?
Right. So Blockstream was advising the government of El Salvador early on when they're rolling out their Bitcoin legal tender law.
Yeah.
We were introduced by my friend Jack Mallers, and then we started advising them on Bitcoin storage, Bitcoin security, and other Bitcoin protocol level topics. But we also were very aware that there was this volcano mining meme going around, and also a volcano bond meme. So we actually put together a deck saying, here's what a volcano bond could look like potentially. Yeah. And we slid that over to them and they were interested. So we started specking out and modeling out different scenarios around this. So we actually tabled 2 proposals. One was the structure that I just outlined. So $1 billion bond, $500 million buying Bitcoin. The second one was future flow. So effectively, it's creating an entity that would be mining Bitcoin and then sharing the mining profits with the bondholders. And they asked for a third proposal, which was just a traditional bond, no Bitcoin involved, but tokenized on a blockchain. And of course, the president picked proposal 1, and that's what we announced together.
Okay. Has it been launched yet officially, the Volcano bond?
No. So there is an order of operations here. First, there is a new digital securities laws that need to go to Congress, and then it will be discussed and potentially edited and then passed. And in that new digital security law will be some regulatory guidance for how to structure an offering. So the terminology used is a key information document, which is sort of like a prospectus for a securities offering. So the Volcano bond or Volcano token, however you want to frame it, is a security. It's not just like a Wild West ICO sale. So the law needs to be passed, the regulations have to be defined, and then an offering document written. And then the bonds can be sold on the offering platform. So there's a series of things that need to happen before we'll see the bonds come out. And that series of events has been delayed due to the recent spate of gang violence in El Salvador, which now seems to be fully under control.
I see. I've read somewhere that currently the bond's already been oversubscribed by about $500 million. Is this true?
That is what Minister Zelaya has said. So people are definitely interested in the bond, and there's been expression of interest to them, to basically everyone that's been involved. So Max Kaiser also has said there's a ton of interest that he's seen. But in general, I think a lot of people in the Bitcoin space are keen to buy and invest in this thing because they want El Salvador to succeed.
Do you know, do you have data as to what kind of investors have already been, participating or subscribed to this? Is it institutional investors? Is it Bitcoin whales, individuals? which governments from which countries? Do you have any information on this?
I believe it's largely Bitcoin whales and possibly cryptocurrency whales. And there are some crypto hedge funds that have also expressed interest, but it's largely players in this existing space. They're not from the legacy space.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, Samson, I mean, the big question is, are you currently working on a similar project for another company? Or another country, rather, not company?
There is a lot of interest, and there have been ideas and discussions back and forth. There are some groups that are looking at doing a similar structure to the Volcano bond, but potentially using land. So buying land and sharing the appreciation of that land after a certain time period. But the structure would still be a Bitcoin bond. So I would say the Bitcoin bond is the high-level overarching structure, and then you have a Volcano bond that is designated Volcano bond because it's using volcano energy to mine Bitcoin. But you can have other kind of subgenres of the Bitcoin bond, like a land-based one.
Okay.
So there are a lot of people interested in the structure because the Bitcoin component is very attractive if you believe in Bitcoin and if you believe Bitcoin will continue to appreciate, because sitting on $500 million of Bitcoin for 10 years should yield some interesting results at the end.
Just to clarify on the terms of the bond, so let's say I'm the purchaser of the bond, you're El Salvador. So I'm giving you money in US dollars, fiat currency, and I have the option to redeem my funds in Bitcoin. Is that how it works, or am I getting confused?
It's all dollar denominated. So you would invest, you could invest Bitcoin, but it'll be mark to market. And at the end, you get paid back in dollars.
Oh, okay. So what is it? There's no actual Bitcoin transaction happening here.
No, it's just mark to market. So there is Bitcoin purchase that is backing the bond, but then the payouts will be done either in USD or USDT.
I see. So the government doesn't have to have the same amount of Bitcoin in its treasury in order to pay back the bondholders, right?
Correct. So when you're buying the bond, if you're buying it with Bitcoin, effectively you're selling Bitcoin at that point.
Okay. Very good. I was at the Bitcoin Miami conference, which is where I met you, Samson. There's been a lot of talk and hype about Honduras being the next country after El Salvador to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. I haven't heard that news out of Honduras yet, but the West African Republic has done so recently. Were you aware of what happened there? So, first of all, the rumors around Honduras, are they true or not? Do you know?
Yeah, I've seen those rumors too ahead of the Miami conference, but I also know that there was a lot of pressure internationally for them not to do anything Bitcoin related. And that was when their central bank published their letter saying, we're going to do a CBDC, and then the Bitcoin legal tender is not true. But at least there's a small foothold in Honduras. So Prospera, it's basically a free charter city. They've adopted Bitcoin as legal tender, and they're on the island of Roatan in Honduras. So there's a small toehold there, and potentially the Honduran government might change their mind down the road and go full Bitcoin. And I think it's inevitable. It's just a matter of time. But there's a lot of people that don't want countries to adopt Bitcoin. There's
a lot of people who don't want. Let's comment on that. What do you mean by that? Who doesn't want a country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender? Besides Bitcoin skeptics.
I think the IMF doesn't like it. They've issued several edicts that said, we like what you're doing with the custodial wallet, but we don't like the Bitcoin legal tender. You should probably undo that. So the legacy financial system does not like this, definitely.
Why not?
Well, I think it upends a lot of what they've built. A lot of the systems that are in place now sort of cement the power of Western nations, and they definitely don't like it when the global South is starting to rise up and throw off the shackles, right? It's the same thing in Africa. You brought up the Central African Republic. It's very interesting because there are 14 or 15 countries in Africa that use the French colonial franc, right? The CFA. So they're effectively using a currency created by France that is controlled by France. And if you met Alex Gladstein too in Miami, but if you read one of his articles, he actually goes in depth into the history of the colonial franc in Africa and all the attempts that African nations have tried to rid themselves of it. And every time they've tried to do that, there's some violence or assassination on whoever is trying to rid themselves of that. So the people that have built these systems definitely don't want these systems to be removed, and for them, Bitcoin is that alternative, right? It's
Right.
the way out for a lot of these countries, and they don't want them to go Bitcoin orange pill route.
I'm just curious as to what the incentive would be for a developing nation to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. So we've seen two now, El Salvador and the West African Republic. These are both developing nations. Is it a political incentive to de-dollarize, step away from the U.S. influence, this U.S. sphere of influence rather, or is it more of a domestic incentive, i.e. they need this new currency to stabilize domestic economic affairs? What do you think was the reasoning behind, let's take El Salvador first?
Well, I can't speak to exactly their reasoning, but I can hypothesize. So I think
Sure.
it's probably a bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
One is they do want to have sovereignty, right? And using the dollar in El Salvador, it brought some economic stability for some time. But as the US continues to print money uncontrollably, it has second order knock-on effects, like negative effects on El Salvador, because like they print money in the US to stimulate the economy, but none of that stimulus money goes to El Salvador directly, right? But the dollar is losing purchasing power and value in El Salvador, which they are all using and earning and getting remittances in. So that is a net negative for El Salvador. And also, I guess the other side is, I believe President Bukele sees the future. He sees the future being based on Bitcoin as the new foundation of a new worldwide financial system. So being the first to adopt it on the level he's adopting it will give El Salvador a massive advantage, because they'll be essentially first movers. They'll be more educated in how to use Bitcoin and transact in Bitcoin and store Bitcoin than other nation states. And if they can raise capital using these bonds, then they can finance the development of their country without having to continue borrowing from the IMF and being effectively a vassal state of the IMF, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you keep borrowing money, that's the only path you can go. You have to keep borrowing money to service old debts. And
Right.
Bitcoin offers a way out from that. For the Central African Republic, I think it's the same thing. They've seen what happened in El Salvador. So if you look on Twitter, the president of the Central African Republic, I can't say his name, it's French, but he is following President Bukele. And I believe there is a strong influence watching what El Salvador has done and learning from them that has influenced their path to adopting Bitcoin. But it's a very similar thing. They have to use the colonial franc, and there's no way out, really. The only way out is to adopt Bitcoin. And in the past, like, if you want to get out off the colonial franc, you'd have to make your own currency. But with the advent of Bitcoin, there's no need for that. There is this new worldwide global permissionless currency that people can just opt into. And it's far easier to do that than minting your own coin or creating your own fiat currency.
Okay. Samson, a lot of people do agree with you that Bitcoin probably is the way of the future for a lot of these developing nations. But take the counter argument. There are several, so I'm just going to list a few. Now, the first one is that if you take El Salvador, for example, since they legalized Bitcoin as legal tender last year, their treasury stock of Bitcoin has fallen dramatically in value because the price of Bitcoin has gone down. So the counter argument from, I guess, opponents of this plan is that a country should not have a volatile asset like Bitcoin in its treasury because, the value of the treasury should be more or less stable. There's also the argument that it's become more or less a centralized asset because one person, Bukele in this case, can literally trade the treasury company's treasury stock on his phone. So it's you're giving one person or one entity a lot of power, hence making it more of a centralized asset than perhaps even a fiat currency-based treasury. How would you respond to these arguments?
Well, he can also trade it naked too. But I think the concept of Bitcoin volatility is a very mainstream media purveyed narrative.
Okay.
If you look at Bitcoin on a 4-year time horizon, if you look at the 4-year moving average, it's never gone down. So the problem is people are looking at Bitcoin as if it was a stock and they're watching it every day. But the real Bitcoiners, and I believe President Bukele included, understand that the value proposition of Bitcoin is long term. It's not week to week, month to month, and Michael Saylor too, right? You're looking at Bitcoin on time horizon of decades, and that's when you see like Bitcoin just keeps going up. So yes, President Bukele can be down on any given day. Michael Saylor can be down on any given day. But let's come back in 10, 20, 30 years and see where it's at, because this is not the game we're playing. Like, you don't look at the value. Sorry, you don't look at the value of your house every day, right? Like, right. Imagine there was a free liquid market for real estate, and it could be dividable down to like very small units. You could buy a fraction of a house. Well, people might be inclined to look at that on a daily basis, but you probably shouldn't buy a home because you want to live in it, in the appreciation of property over a longer time frame.
I'm gonna ask you about your thesis about Bitcoin long term, but just to wrap up the conversation about country adoption, do you have any speculation or any thoughts on whether or not we could see another El Salvador or another West African Republic anytime soon? What's the next country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, you think?
Well, it looks like Panama is coming. They're just waiting for a signature from the president to sign off on the law. That was pretty unexpected. I mean, even the Central African Republic was unexpected. It just came out of nowhere. I think definitely within this year, it's possible we'll see another one appear. And I'm actually working on a number of countries too, with Bitcoiners on the ground in different places. So like there's two paths here. One is Bitcoin is pushing actively, and the other path is natural adoption, where they figure it out on their own and they say, okay, we're going to use Bitcoin. So I think prospects are looking good this year.
It's okay if you don't answer this next question, but I have to do my job as a journalist. Which of these countries are you working on?
I'm working with some people in Mexico. So Indira Kempis, she's a Mexican senator, and also Ricardo Salinas. That's the Mexican Avengers team trying to get Bitcoin adoption in Mexico. And a couple others I don't want to name yet, but there's more in play.
So all of those countries that you're working on could potentially adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. Can we make that statement?
I believe so,
Mexico.
But I don't think legal tender necessarily has to take place. The key is removing capital gains and accepting Bitcoin as money. And you can also have de facto legal tenders. So
that's right.
Lugano has made Bitcoin de facto legal tender because there's no cap gains in Switzerland. So they encourage you to pay your taxes and everything in Bitcoin and use Bitcoin.
Well, legal tender means that if, let's say, you and I make a transaction in a jurisdiction that makes Bitcoin legal tender, like El Salvador, you are obligated to accept my Bitcoin as a payment, right? There are some people that say, we don't really want this. We should just make it so that it's allowed, so that if I want to give you Bitcoin as for a service or good, you can take it, but also you have the right to refuse and say, no, David, I want US dollars or I want the local currency, right? What do you think?
Well, I believe legal tender is a temporary bridge, right?
Okay.
Like the concept of legal tender stems from fiat currencies. So back when we went off the gold standard, they needed legal tender to say, you need to take these pieces of paper now, right? So it's kind of a holdover from that era. And I don't believe it's necessary. People know what is valuable, right? People know that gold is valuable. People know that Bitcoin is valuable. You don't need a law to say you need to take what's valuable, right? It's common sense. But it is a high level endorsement, I would say. But again, in El Salvador, you're not forced to take Bitcoin for payments, right? It's optional, and no one's going to jail because they didn't take Bitcoin. So the key here is really adoption of Bitcoin, and it could take many form factors, legal tender being one of them, de facto legal tender another one, and just general embracing of Bitcoin.
Are you surprised that the adoption of Bitcoin on a country level happened first in the developing areas? All these countries that we've talked about so far, they're not advanced G7, G20 economies, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's a surprise at all. Necessity is the mother of invention, and adoption of Bitcoin is also by necessity. They need Bitcoin, and they figured out that they need Bitcoin. Typically, more developed nations don't understand that they need Bitcoin. So let's take Canada as an example.
Yes.
I don't think Canada or Canadians in general realize we need Bitcoin, but we actually do. So we've sold off all of our gold reserves over the past couple of decades. So we have zero gold reserves.
The government certainly doesn't agree with you. There's been a trucker protest a couple months ago. Cryptocurrency transfers were blocked. Remember that?
Right. So, I mean, this is a lesson for the people that if you cede control of your money over to the government, then, well, it's not your money anymore.
Okay.
But it's an advertisement for Bitcoin in a way. And hopefully, this advertisement will allow us to change the government of Canada in a couple of years. And we'll have a government that understands fiscal responsibility, understands sound money, and understands Bitcoin. And that's when we'll see changes in Western nations. I think for Western nations, you have to change the political environment first before you can change the economic environment.
Okay. Now, stable coins. Let's talk about stable coins. So why haven't these countries, El Salvador, the West African Republic, why haven't they designed their own stable coin instead of adopting an existing crypto like Bitcoin? They could have just made their own, right?
Right. But I mean, then you're just going back into the fiat currency game, right? And all currencies in the past have generally failed. Like they last a couple hundred years at best. But it's a scheme where it has to end. I believe Max Kaiser said this: you can't taper a Ponzi. So once you go down the money printing route, you can only print money. You can print money faster or print money slower, but you have to print money or else everything crumbles. So making your own currency, your own digital currency, there's a very slippery slope there. I think you theoretically could do a good job of it if you made privacy a key component, privacy and fungibility a key component. But as you can see, that's not usually the case. So let's go back to Canada as an example.
Yeah.
There was a job posting on the Bank of Canada's job site, I think a year ago, and they said, we're looking for people to build our CBDC, a nice Canadian, central bank currency. And if you read through the job description, it basically said, we want this to be private, but not too private. So then you get into the whole challenge of making the money a surveillance tool instead of money, because the temptation is there. Like, if we can monitor it, why not monitor it? But then you go into the whole conundrum with the truckers, right? Like, if you can monitor it and control it, then it's not really money, because if you could freeze it, it's not sound money. It's not good money.
Right.
So the problem is you'll never see a central bank build a good central bank digital currency. The only way for them to do it is to give up controls of the monetary supply and give up surveillance, but it's just not in their DNA. So the only choice really is to go with Bitcoin.
Okay, Samson, I'm assuming you're not going to apply for that job, right? From the Bank of Canada.
Probably not.
Okay,
we have Bitcoin. We don't need that.
Hypothetically, okay, let's say you got the job. Let's say you're the chief designer, chief architect of Canada's new CBDC. And the government says you have free reign, you do whatever you want. And you're to design the ideal digital currency for the government. What would it be backed by? What are the terms?
Well, the funny thing is there's nothing backing fiat currencies, right?
Well,
that's why they're all going to zero. The temptation is. But I'm
the government. I'm the governor of the Bank of Canada. I say, Samson, well, let's make it a little more concrete than a fiat currency, right? This brand new digital currency. You can do whatever you want with it. Any backing, any pegging you want.
Well, the backing doesn't matter. I mean, all fiat currencies are backed by full faith and credit of the issuer, right? But if I had free reign, I would say we'll back it with gold and Bitcoin, something that people are familiar with. And then I would build it using existing open source technology. So at Blockstream, they have a fork of Bitcoin called Elements that has confidential transactions. So I would either use that and create a federation to operate this new CBDC, or I would use a Chaumian mint, so Fedimint or Minimint. But these are effectively decentralized ways to preserve privacy and fungibility of a central bank digital currency. And the thing is, you don't need to invest in R&D. All of these things already exist and they're open source. So they're far more robust, reliable, and resilient than anything that could be made by a central bank.
Yeah, that leads to my next question, which is about commodities-backed stable coins. I think it was Max Kaiser, and he's not the only person with this view, but Max Kaiser has said that potentially China is working on a gold-backed cryptocurrency. There's a rumor going around. Have you heard of anything similar, or is this possible?
I've heard a few countries that are looking at some commodity-backed currencies. I think
Yeah.
it only makes sense. Um, I don't believe we'll be trading Bitcoin against the US dollar and other fiat currencies for that much longer, just because it makes zero sense that you're trading Bitcoin against something that can be printed out of thin air. It's like trading Bitcoin against monopoly money. I think the future is going to be commodity-based stablecoins like Tether Gold, and I believe Kitco also has a product too. But the challenge will be to get people to understand this. That it's better to trade Bitcoin against gold than to trade Bitcoin against dollars. But dollars are effectively a unit of account, and people are very familiar with it. It's a unit of account and medium of exchange without any value behind it. So flipping their thinking to understand that it's better to trade against a store of value, even though it's not a unit of account or medium of exchange, is actually better in the long run because it'll be more reliable. So I believe we'll see more things like Tether Gold. We'll see maybe something like silver-backed, oil-backed. But then the challenge will be on these issuers to prove they have the reserves. And I think private companies doing these things will have an advantage over, say, a government backing their reserves, because governments are not trusted that much anymore. Right. And having independent auditors come in and check, if let's say you have an oil-based stablecoin, how many barrels of oils do you actually have? And they can actually verify and publish attestations on that to a level that government agencies would not do or cannot do.
Just on a quick note, how do you feel about algorithmic stablecoins? That's not really backed by a reserve. It's just, the burn rate is determined by an algorithm.
In theory, it's interesting, but the challenge with algo coins is they can be crashed by the price. And it happens time and time again. That's why one of the more popular ones these days is trying to backstop by buying Bitcoin. But
yeah,
we'll see.
You're talking about definitely Luna, right? You're talking about Luna.
Yeah. That's what they're trying to do. But I would say it's safer to use something like Tether or anything controlled, because at least it's backed 1-to-1 by reserve assets. Whereas the algo coin, you're relying on the algorithm and the price movement at any given time.
Final question, I'll let you go, Samson. Your company, Jan3, is dedicated to the mission of spreading hyperbitcoinization. So it's the concept, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the concept where every facet of our life is involved with Bitcoin somehow, right?
Yeah.
How do we get there? What's the roadmap?
Well, I think we need more education. I believe creating a better mobile wallet, a more accessible one, is key. Because people in emerging markets, they need that elegance, simple UX, UI, and it needs to be readily understandable and easy to use. And I think there's a lot of challenges on that front, which I hope to tackle with Jan3. The other part is just getting awareness, getting people to understand what Bitcoin is. And a big part of that can come from nation state adoption, because every time a country adopts Bitcoin, you get a massive flurry of media coverage. That's right. In traditional media, not just like the coin and block media that covers every cryptocurrency story, but getting into local magazines, local newspapers. That's where you reach the masses. And I'll give you one example. So when the president of Madeira was on stage with me at Miami, and he said, we're adopting Bitcoin, that actually went back to the local publications in Madeira. And that's how you educate and bring Bitcoin to people's attention. And it's a process. They learn about Bitcoin in general, like, okay, so Madeira is doing something with it. And then they might start researching, understanding what Bitcoin is. And then they might understand why you need Bitcoin and how Bitcoin is important. So it's a way, nation state adoption is a way to orange pill the world. And I think pushing Bitcoin through that path is a good goal. And that's what I want for Jan3.
According to various surveys, depending on the source, there's anywhere between 50 to 100 million people currently in the world who use cryptocurrencies or have at some point used cryptocurrencies. So we're in 2022 now. Let's say by 2030, which is 8 years from now, realistically, what is the adoption rate from a percentage of global population basis?
It's difficult to project, but I would hope it would be at 10 to 20%, maybe
Yeah.
30%.
Hmm.
And there is precedent for this. So adoption of touchscreen phones like the iPhone, right? That happened in a very short time frame.
Yes.
And technology, especially good technology, can grow exponentially. And I believe it's going to be the same case for Bitcoin.
Excellent. Samson, best of luck with your journey. I hope to speak to you again soon. Thank you for coming on Kitco today.
Yeah. Thanks, David. It's been fun.
And thanks for watching Kitco News. I'm David Lin. Stay tuned for more.